I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, a democracy in a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states, a perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity, for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and to defend it against all enemies. Heavenly Father, as we gather here together in this classroom, we ask that you guide our studies and lead us to understanding. We also ask that you protect the individuality of each student as they question and ponder your word in these matters. Thank you, Father, for this beautiful place of learning. We pray these words in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Welcome back to GW Bridge Academy. This is Ms. Krewalt. We are continuing on in American history with Unit 3, and this is Lesson 5. And this is the most researched, recorded, talked about, fabled, movie making, discussed, analyzed, researched again, taught about time period in American history. I mean, World War II is just probably has more research, more recording, more books about it than any other time period in American history, because it is just so phenomenal in terms of the amount of events that are going on, the amount of changes that are going on, and just the drama of it all is just so exciting. So I'm going to say my disclaimer again. This is a lot of material. I have spent a lot of time thinking about what's the best information to give you. You know, as someone who is probably about 14 or 15, 13 years old, and I'm trying to give you your first introduction to this in American history. So bear with me. There's a lot of information, but I'm really trying to give it to you in a manner that you can take it in and enjoy it and understand it. And the next time you hear about it, you're going to recognize a lot of these names and a lot of these battles, and you can just go to town on it, you know, and constantly learn as much as you want about this time period in American history, because the resources for it are endless. Absolutely endless. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started with World War II. Okay, first I have to warn you that I caught some bug at school, and it kind of took me down for a week, and I'm probably speaking at a whole octave lower than I normally speak. So I hope that's not too annoying, and if you would please just bear with me. Okay, this American timeline. Well, I wanted to come in here and back up in time a little bit and talk to you about the Japanese and a little bit of their military history, especially leading up to this war, because we're not doing world history, we're doing American history, but their history in particular is going to affect how they fight the Americans and how they fought the Russians. Japan pretty much holds the record as the only Asian country that defeated a major European power. And that was quite remarkable. And it kind of goes untalked about quite a bit. But this had a huge impact. They forced Russia out of their territory. They actually beat them militarily. And that was extraordinary in history. Okay, that happened in 1905. And then after World War I, Japan was given Germany's Pacific Islands after the war at the Treaty of Versailles. They were, in other words, you know, a lot of the land in Europe, and a lot of these imperial islands that were in the Pacific were given away to different countries to manage because Germany had to forfeit those holdings when they lost World War I. So Japan is getting a lot of real estate here, and they are using it, and they decide that it is island hopping time to other countries that they can now imperialize, and they're just on a roll leading up to this war, and especially leading up to how their participation in it, particularly with the US. And during this time, there is going to be a rise of fascism in Europe. Fascism is different from communism in a lot of ways, both going down the wrong road in terms of tyranny over the people, but it is different in terms of how they see their own economy and their own people. Okay, so that's very important. We're going to talk about that. Nazis are going to come in, and basically Hitler's going to conquer Europe. Just flat out, he's going to take the whole continent there. Okay, it's absolutely astounding how successful he is at just walking all over people. And one of the biggest problems here is because there is no one to stop him from doing it. Okay, a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have a very difficult economy at this time around the world. Once America shut down and had that bust, well, the bust went around the world because when America stops supplying things, everybody else's business just slows down. So there is a lot of economic woe around the world, not just in America during those 30s. And then in 1940, Britain is facing down Hitler, taking them next, and basically jumping that little English Channel and having Britain for dinner. And part of the problem is that the prime minister that was there before Winston Churchill just appeased Hitler and said, okay, as long as you don't eat me, we're good to go. Okay, don't eat Britain, and you can have everything you took in Europe. Okay, that's not how you treat a bully, and we're going to figure out how you do treat a bully. Okay, and no, you know what? Winston Churchill's going to show you how to treat a bully. Okay, so we're going to get a good example of that there. All right, and then Hitler is going to make a century-old fatal mistake. He's going to do what Napoleon did, and he's going to open up a second battlefront. And then it's going to split his forces, it's going to split his efforts, split his supplies, and it's going to take him down. And he thinks he can do it in a short amount of time, probably because he's getting arrogant. And he's going to get himself and his troops stuck in Germany, and they are going to just stall out before they hit Moscow because basically it's winter and the polar vortex has arrived in Russia. Okay, Japan is going to attack Pearl Harbor, and of course America is going to declare war on them. And Churchill and FDR are pretty much going to team up, and they're going to decide we are taking Hitler out first, and then we're going to deal with finishing off Japan and getting them off our back. Okay, then we're going to go into the European theater of war and all the way up to D-Day, and Germany is going to surrender. The war in Europe is going to be over, but work is not done because the whole Pacific is lighting up right now with naval forces that we have already sent over there, and we are going to go through an entire campaign in the Pacific. And that campaign is going to end with a very grave ending. We are entering the atomic age, and those atomic bombs are going to be the death knell of Japan, but it's also going to set off a whole nother reality for America and the world after this war. So, as always, the story never ends. Okay, so, but for here, that's where we're going to stop in terms of the atomic age. Of course, this is all going to get wrapped up with Japan surrendering, and there's going to be war crimes for both Japan and Germany that will finish up this lecture. Okay? All right, let's get started because we have plenty to talk about. All right, let's talk about Japan a little bit of their history before we talk about World War II. Japan made military history, and no one even really talks about it that much. A lot of historians consider this time period World War Zero, because what happened is Russia, who is in a very northern, of course, geographically, they're up so far north that they have a lot of difficulties, obviously, because of the weather. Okay, so they're always looking in their imperialistic efforts for warmer ports and resources for especially things like growing food and stuff because they don't have the climate to do a lot of that. And so what happens is Russia is going to pressure them to try to give them Manchuria and Korea. They want that land and they're going to come get it. Okay, well, Japan wants it too. Okay, wanted it too. And actually, they had agreed to give them part of Korea, but Russia said that wasn't enough. They wanted the whole peninsula, probably because there's just so much land. There's so much coastline there that would have given them an excellent port advantage and trading advantage to have those ports there. So obviously that's what they're after. And I put this map up here because you can see from the railroad lines that are coming out of Moscow and coming south and coming into Manchuria. And through Manchuria, they're going down to a place called Port Arthur. And this is where a lot of the fighting's happening because that's one of the ports that Russia wants, but it really wants all of Korea. But what happens is Japan says no, and they make an offer and it's turned down. So they say, forget it, then you're not going to have anything. Okay, so what happens is they don't get anything. They actually got Russia off their back. Okay, and for a small country like Japan to have that big of a military win was unprecedented. No Asian power had had a victory over a major European power until this time. And so it's a major event and it doesn't get talked about a lot. But the reason why I bring it up, first of all, what is it about the Japanese that you need to understand that they were able to fend off a people that are some of the largest human beings in the world? I mean, Russians are very large, powerful men. Okay, they're like Germans. They're just very big and they're very aggressive and strong. Okay, and Japanese are smaller in stature people. So what is it that they had that made them extremely difficult to fight for the Russians? Well, you're going to find out they have a fighting style that is just, it's either you're going to kill me or you're not going to get past where I'm standing. They just entrench themselves and they fight to the death. It is very rare. It would be dishonorable for them to give up and be taken prisoner. Okay, so that's not an option. Okay, so they dig in and they just tolerate as much abuse as they can possibly tolerate until they either are killed or forcibly removed, but they are not going to give up. They just do not give up. It's amazing. It's a tenacity that has made them a world power at this time. And so it's very important to note that because that history is going to affect how they fight America as well. Okay, and hopefully America was taking notes during the Russo-Japanese War because this was a good lesson for us to put down in the history books for the next time that we have to encounter the Japanese, because that is not going to be an easy fight. Okay, Russia is going to get sent back home with nothing. The imperialism is just going to go into hyperdrive mode for Japan, and they are going to come in and take more of Asia and a lot of these islands. They're going to take them by force, but a lot of them after World War I, they're going to actually get to claim they get to claim, or they were given control over Germany's northern Pacific islands, their imperialistic land holdings. And so this was a huge windfall for them. And this gives them a lot of transportation assistance. Okay, now, of course, their naval fleet is going to be just phenomenal because they're traveling around militarily using that, and now they have access to all these islands to kind of island hop to where they need to go, much like the trading that America does, where you need a place to stop over, refuel, resupply, and then keep moving as you're conquering other nations. Okay, it's just part of the game, it's part of the necessity you have. Okay, so they're going to get all of Germany's islands that I have listed here, and that is where Japan's going to be situated when we have to encounter them as Americans in World War II. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right, the rise of fascism in Europe. Remember, after World War I, Germany has been completely broken down. They lost a lot of real estate, basically. They lost a lot of land, and it was given back to nations that it should have belonged to initially. And so Germany's quite small, and they have, of course, these huge reparations that they're trying to keep up with. And on top of that, they're in a depression too. Remember, once America hit their depression, it just cascaded around the world. Okay, and so they're weakened by that. They cannot keep up with reparations. The Germans are getting frustrated, and they're looking for a new leader. The same thing is happening in Italy, and so these two countries are going to be ripe for the picking when it comes to the rise of this fascism. So let's talk about fascism a little bit. Basically, fascism is a belief in ethnic superiority, that the Italians are the finest nation on the planet, okay? And dictatorial control of the nation is needed to maintain that pride and to maintain that unity, because that's power to them. What happens is it makes the dictator very popular, because a lot of people will fall under that spell, so to speak, that they're somehow becoming wealthier, more prosperous, and powerful because they have this national pride going on that's super inflated and not very realistic and not based on anything. But nevertheless, you're driving that propaganda. And you're also looking for a scapegoat, okay? Who's not allowing you to have what you want? Okay, for Hitler, of course, this is going to be focused on the Jews, the Jewish people, okay? And it doesn't matter, not just the ones in Germany, all over Europe. And so for a couple of reasons, they're opposed to individual liberty because they don't want the individual to think that they're above the state in terms of power or importance. Okay, so that's why the individual is subservient in power to the nation and its image. And they're also opposed to communism because, remember, communism is all about class warfare, and that divides the state. And that's the last thing a fascist wants to do, is to divide the people in the state. They need the people in the state to be all thinking the same thing. Okay, we're great and we're going to take everybody else's land because we're great. I mean, just basically it's that simple and that ridiculous. But this type of incredibly insane fascism, that's how it works. All right, so in Italy, Benito Mussolini is going to rise to power in about 1922. He's going to decide, okay, we're so fabulous in Italy that we are going to just create the Roman Empire again. Okay, they want to be the second Roman Empire. And so he's going to put together his thugs that are basically his enforcers. Those are called the black shirts. And they're going to go start imperializing, okay? And they're going to invade Ethiopia in 1935, and they're going to invade Albania in 1939. And remember, in America, we're still dealing with our own economic woes at this time. So we are, and playing isolationists. So we are not there to police this situation. But Italy is part of Europe, and Europe was supposed to be overseen by the League of Nations that was actually created. Remember, America never did enter the League of Nations because the U.S. Senate refused to do so, even though that's what President Wilson wanted. But there was a League of Nations, but they were completely useless. It didn't matter what these fascist dictators were doing. They just kept allowing them to do it because they did not want to get involved with this situation. They probably felt a little overpowered by the bully. So Italy's going to have no problem taking over these two areas. Now, in Germany, Adolf Hitler did fight in Germany in the First World War. Not happy with that outcome, okay? That was too much pride for him to have to lose in that war. So he decides he's just going to turn it on and just immediately go to town. In 1919, he is given the assignment to go to and investigate a communist workers' party. The government was trying to determine, are these people going to be radical? Are they going to be challenging our system, our government system, our power? Well, he goes there and finds out that he's got a whole set of future army sitting here. And if he can just talk to them and convince them that they're awesome, he might be able to lead them and make them part of an army. Now, in his mind, this is what he's doing. And the reason why this was politically very savvy was because they could not engage in any military activity. Okay? They could not do that. They could not build up armies. But Hitler is looking at this group of very radical, very aggressive workers' communist party, and he's going to turn them into a new party under his control. And he's even going to try to attempt a coup of the government, the German government at this time, and it's going to get him thrown in prison. So he turns them into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and that's how they get the name Nazi, okay? The NA for national and ZI for the socialist part, okay? So, which probably has something to do with German that I have no clue what that is. He's going to go to prison, but really not even that long. Like, he's supposed to be there 5 years. He ends up getting out in 10 months. Okay. But this is when he writes Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. Okay. Again, he never stops pulling strength underneath him so that he can have power later. Even in prison, he is dictating Mein Kampf to his prison mates so that when they get out, they're just going to go to town. Okay, everywhere he looks, he is going to start to build up power. But he's doing it under the radar so that it can go unnoticed by the League of Nations and by the rest of Europe, because they're not going to consider it actual military buildup. He creates I don't even know how to say the Schutzstaffel, which is the SS, and that's going to be a militia, okay? Not really considered military, okay? Just a fighting group. He's also going to be very savvy about going into the young children and encouraging them to form together and putting them through military exercises when they get to be about 14 or 15, okay? Even getting the little ones in. Okay, there's horrible stories about the things that they would send the children to do, especially in the Jewish ghettos that he's going to set up. But we're not going to go off on that tangent. But know that he has that kind of influence, okay? And he's going to draw in and demand that type of influence on the young Germans. He's going to set up that the Aryan race is supposed to be the master race, and he is going to cleanse it so that it will be a master race. Okay, he's going to set up a secret police called the Gestapo. He's going to get the propaganda flowing so that it kind of feeds into this whole nationalist type of sentimentality. And of course, Goebbels is running that propaganda puppet. And just to make sure everyone's on board, he's going to, right off the bat, going to have 150 people assassinated just to make sure everybody knows where they need to be, and if they leave, it's not going to be good for them. Okay, and once the chancellor's position opens up, He just appoints himself. And so he becomes the Führer, the leader, okay, the ultimate powerful political leader. And to just top it all off, he decides that this Aryan race needs more land. And that's what this Lebensraum is. It's living room for the master race. They need more land. So here's your excuse for going out and imperializing and conquering new lands. All right. And so the last thing here, the last tool in the box is that they need a scapegoat. In literature, they call this the character foil. It's someone that's completely opposite so that you can bring out the features of the other character. And so it provides that kind of opposite contrast. And so they target the Jews. They just that's their scapegoat. And they basically just paint them to be an evil race that is somehow taking something from the Aryan race. And if they just keep feeding that story, people are going to believe it. They're going to want to believe it. People are suffering right now, and it's like an easy sale to make. All right, so that horrendous situation is going to start taking place very early on, okay? And this is going to build while in America, we are still dealing with our own situation and our own economic situation, but Hitler is building up his power, okay? And he's building up how he's going to conquer Europe. Now, this map up here shows you the beginnings of these lands that he's going to start moving into and taking over militarily. And of course, this is a huge violation of the Treaty of Versailles, but again, there's no one to stop him. Now, what happens is he gets into a non-aggression pact with the Soviets. Okay, this is Russia, but now under the new Bolshevik leadership. Okay, so, and it's gotten a new name. It is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And so now they're the Soviets. And so he's made a non-aggression pact with the Soviets, and he's made a non-aggression pact with Italy. And basically, that's like saying, look, this is my bank to go rob. Okay, I'm going to rob this bank. I'm going to rob this one over here. But I'm not going to bother you as long as you don't rob the bank I'm trying to rob. Okay, that is basically what we're coming down to here. That's a non-aggression pact between these three nations. And they're going to go for it. And since they're kind of both want Poland, they're just going to decide to split Poland down the middle, and the Soviets get half and Germany gets half. And of course, you can see down there that Italy is pushing out into Ethiopia and Albania. Okay, and of course, Germany is not going to stop there. All right, now, if you remember back at World War I, that Russia was on the Allied side against Germany. And remember at the end of that war that Russia had a change of leadership and an entire revolution was happening at that time. And remember, Lenin gets help from Germany to come to power. And that's very important in this war because basically that's how they're going to be able to negotiate with Germany. But Russia's loyalties are going to waver. And it's going to be influenced heavily by the fact that Germany is going to turn on them. All right, so let's look at this map. What I've put here is there is a map of post-World War I Europe. And these are the boundaries of these nations at the time that when World War I was over. And I've given you a blank map because I want you to be able to correlate these two. I want you to be able to read maps and understand them. And when you look at them, be familiar with geographically where you're finding a certain country and what they're next to. Okay, just a little cartography here. Just going in and labeling in the blank map where these countries are will help you kind of formulate in your mind how this is happening on a geographic level. And I'm going to go through the three countries that are imperializing right now. And let's start with Italy. And if you look down at the bottom, the numbers that you see on the map are correlating with numbers that you see at the bottom. Okay, so Italy is first, And Italy is going into two countries, and we already talked about that. And you see Italy labeled on the slide right there. So that's Italy, and they're going to go into Ethiopia, which is number 1. And number 2, just to the right, okay, it's just jumping over the Mediterranean there. And just to the right is Albania, which is in part of Europe. Italy is not really going to take much more than that at this time. Now, Russia is looking to get in on this action. So Russia is going to make this pact, and they're going to say, look, we want Poland, so we'll split it with you. And then just above to the left, you see the same numbers in the same color. Obviously, Russia is green. And then you see a 1 up on the other side of that dotted green line. That's East Prussia, and they're going to split that little piece of land as well. And so they're splitting Poland and East Prussia. And Russia is also going to go into Finland and take Finland. Okay? And Russia's pretty much going to stop there, or they're going to be stopped. Now, Hitler in Germany is going to make his military move. And it's going to just absolutely be a slap in the face to the Treaty of Versailles. He's going to go into the Rhineland. Now, the Rhineland, you can see, is labeled by a red number 1. It's right there to the left of the name Germany. And it's on the border of France and Belgium. Those are the two countries that he violated he didn't violate them, but Germany violated those boundaries in the last war. And so they were forbidden to put any military presence there at all. And that's the first thing that he does. It's a show of power, basically. So he takes the Rhineland right there at number 1. Second, he goes into Austria and makes a pact again with Austria. Okay, this too was forbidden by the Treaty of Paris. All right, a Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Versailles, which is near Paris. Okay, and third, he's going to take Czechoslovakia. And basically, he's just got all of his military built up, and they just march in. And these countries do not offer resistance because they don't have a lot of resistance to offer. They don't have big, huge militaries. They were already suffering from having been taken over the First World War. Okay, and they're in deep economic trouble already, and a lot of them are starving. Okay, so there's not a lot of power here to throw against Germany that is now building up into this huge power. And he's just going to keep steamrolling. So he goes in, and obviously he's going to share Poland with Russia, and then he's going to go into Denmark. Now, Denmark is up above the name Germany right there, number 5. Okay, that little area with the islands. Then he's just going to keep on. He's just going to jump the pond over there and go into Norway and take Norway. Then Hitler decides he's just going to brazenly do exactly what Germany did in the First World War and go right through Belgium to get to France. Okay. But he's going to wait and take the Netherlands and Luxembourg. Luxembourg is that little bitty space between the 7 and the 1. Okay, it's a little bitty tiny country sandwiched in between there. But that's what number 9 is, Luxembourg. But this is all to clear the way to get into France. And he just steamrolls through France. France offers resistance for a while, but for the most part, what happens is they set up this puppet government. And it's referred to as the Vichy French. And basically, they have found someone who's not going to resist them. They're afraid of Hitler, and they're just going to comply. They're just going to do whatever Hitler wants. So he's going to allow them to do his work for them. You know, as far as he's concerned, as long as the French are going to do what he tells them to do, they can think that they're in power in France. And so that's what this Vichy government is set up. I don't want to get too much in the weeds with that, but basically just know that that's how he was operating in France. And those people were intimidated. And so when there was, if the French were not complying with Hitler's demands, The Vichy government that was set up there was going to abuse them, was going to turn them in. Okay. So there's power there, because they've got Hitler to back them up. And so you've got basically, it's an internal struggle because you've got these people in power that are basically just bowing to Hitler and just doing whatever it is he's asking them to do. I mean, basically betraying their own country. But, for Hitler, no big deal. As long as they've got that handled, he's going to go on and he's going to take Hungary. And then he's going to move east and take Romania, number 12. And then looky there, right next to him, let's just march right into Bulgaria and take that too. And you know what? Let's just turn back to the west and take Yugoslavia. No problem here. And look at all those ports on the Mediterranean. You know what? We can have Greece too. Takes Greece. And then he decides that the communist really, he doesn't want to honor that agreement anymore, and he's done with that. Now, remember, fascists do not like communists. Okay, they actually just abhor communists because communists provoke class warfare, and it destroys a nation. I mean, that's what communism does. It destroys nations. And so he is going to decide that he's going to set himself up with a two-front war here because he thinks he can take Russia in no time at all before the winter. And so he invades Russia, okay, the USSR. And while he's at it, he's just going to grab Lithuania, 17, 18 Latvia, and 19 Estonia. And he has effectively conquered Europe. Together with Italy, they have conquered the entire European continent right here. And there's a couple of nations in here that are neutral. The ones that aren't marked, obviously. There's one there in the middle, right under number 9, and that is Switzerland, is going to remain neutral. Spain, over there on the peninsula, next to France, that's going to remain neutral. Turkey, opposite of Greece, that's going to remain neutral. And the only resistance he's getting is obviously from Great Britain. He's not ready to take Great Britain, but that's going to be his next stop. So if you're a neutral country in this situation, basically what you're doing is saying, just don't come into my country and I won't bother you. If you just leave me alone, I will stay here and I will not resist anything that you're doing to my nice neighbor. Even though you've destroyed my nice neighbor's country, I will, as long as you don't bother me, I'm not going to do anything about it. Okay? And I'm not saying they necessarily could have done anything about it, but that is basically the position you're taking when you're neutral. Okay? And don't think that that's going to last forever. Okay? That was never going to last forever if the Allies hadn't stepped in and stopped this madman. Okay? He would have taken everything. So there you go. The conquering of Europe. A German soldier who literally just walked out of World War I with a plan to just take it all back. And it is quite astounding how he is able to do this. But again, he has no resistance. Not even the League of Nations, which was set up to be that resistance, is going to do anything about this. However, not everybody's going to be content to let this bully just push his way around Europe. So enter stage right, Winston Churchill. Okay, he is rising to power, not really the way these guys are rising to power, but politically he's becoming very popular in Britain because he's very outspoken about this aggression that he sees Hitler making all across Europe, and he's very vocal about it. And he's condemning Hitler's actions publicly. Now, this is in contrast to the existing prime minister at the time, which is Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain has just returned from a conference with Hitler. And this happened in 1938, and it's the Munich conference. And all of the European nations got together, and you can see that picture in there on the top left there. That's Chamberlain on the left, and shaking Hitler's hand on the right there. Okay, the French are there, other countries' leaders are there. But Chamberlain has basically said, look, you're done. We don't want you to take any more land. Don't conquer any more nations. Stop what you're doing, and we will leave you alone. Okay, and so other than being neutral, basically what they're saying is, please stop. We're done now. Okay, and they're actually foolish enough to think that Hitler is going to stop what he's doing. Okay, this is some of the most foolish political thinking you could possibly have at a time like this. Nevertheless, that's what's going on. And so at this time, when he gets back from the conference, forget it. He's going to lose power, and Churchill's going to be appointed Prime Minister of Great Britain. And there's going to be no appeasement by Churchill. And appeasement is basically just giving in to demands. So when Hitler leaves and someone asks him, well, what are you going to do about, this Munich agreement? You can't just go into these other countries. He's flippant about it. He didn't take that seriously at all. His quote was, our enemies are little worms. I saw them at Munich. That's how he thought of Great Britain. Spineless worms. He had no respect for them whatsoever. And Churchill's looking at this and observing this, and he's saying, this is ridiculous because Chamberlain has basically become the one who feeds the crocodile, hoping that it will eat him last, which is exactly what's going to happen. So under Churchill, France has already fallen to Hitler, okay? And Britain's going to have to stand alone against this huge aggressor that is coming straight for Great Britain. And I think this is an extraordinary time in British history that really shows their nettle, really shows their ability to, when they have to turn it on, they turn it on. But with good leadership, they were able to do that. And I really feel like without Churchill, Britain would have easily fallen to Hitler. So Hitler's Operation Sea Lion is to go in and take Britain, just like it took all these other European countries. But Churchill is going to offer resistance. And a good way to get a feel for what type of attitude he had is to listen to this speech that he gives. So I want you to go to the audio now and just listen to him talk. Churchill, and I think we talked about this a little bit before, but Churchill slurs his speech a little bit, and he's actually doesn't speak well, but his words are just incredible. And his resolve, you can really hear it in this speech because he has to come with this with all his guns. And he really brings a good speech to this. So his plan is going to be laid out. So go take a listen. And it also has, it's great because it has his words speaking as the audio, but you can see some of the military warfare that's going on at this time between Germany and Britain. So that video's in there. It's actually a video with Churchill's audio. So go ahead and take a look at that video. Okay, that's Churchill. I mean, quite a character, okay? I can't get enough of listening to that recording. I just think it's fabulous. Okay, now what they've gotten into, and just quickly here with Dunkirk, and it seems like we've talked about this before, but basically all of the French and British soldiers were stuck at Dunkirk, and that's at the very edge by the channel, okay, by the English Channel. So all they have to do is get across the water. The problem is they can't get across the water, okay? They cannot get ships there in order to, it's a very shallow area to come into, and they were not able to get on these ships up to the port, okay, to pick them up. And so they're forced into this area, and they're just going to get taken out like fish in a fishbowl, okay, like shooting fish in a fishbowl. It would have been horrible. What happens is that the Germans actually have to kind of take a step back and reevaluate the situation because the weather is not cooperating with them, and they can't get in their air force And so the bombing is stopping. It gives Churchill a chance to plead with the British people and tell them, send every shallow draft vessel you have across the channel. Civilians were doing this, not just military, okay? Civilians were taking their shallow draft fishing boats, pleasure cruisers, everything across the channel to pick up the army, just as many soldiers as you can get on there, any ship that can get in there to go in there and do that. And they were able to save a lot of soldiers that way. Now, they are still going to get hammered by fire at this time, but for the most part, that really did save the British military forces that were stuck there at Dunkirk. Now, another thing that happens is Hitler's already running his Luftwaffe across the channel and just pounding on Britain, bombing Britain. And Britain is having to engage its Royal Air Force into these dogfights to try to repel the Germans. And the amazing thing is that some of these guys are running 5 sorties a day. So this is where you really see the British tenacity rising out of its people. I mean, well, they have to. They have to do this to survive. And so there's just extraordinary feats that are going on every day by the ground crew, the pilots in the air, anything they can do to repel the Germans and get them to get off their back. And the amazing thing is that they actually get them off their back. It's not worth it. The Germans were just losing too many planes this way. And so it was a good way to kind of get all that aggression stopped, at least for a little while. So Operation Sea Lion's going to be Hitler's first real fail here, okay? He is not going to be happy about it, but the British have managed to muster the power to repel him after about 5 months of these bombing raids that keep coming over from Germany. So that's going to take us up to about the beginning of November in 1940. Now, with this new slide, I put on here the tide turns, because this is the point in the war where Hitler makes a fatal mistake. And you got to be thinking about what's going on psychologically here. I mean, this person is a egotistical maniac. I mean, literally, like clinical. And he has been turned away from what he wanted, which was Britain. And so he decides, well, then I'm just going to go find the next best thing and find someone else to pick on, and it's going to be a good find. So he decides to take on his former ally, which was Russia. Remember, they split Poland to decide that they were going to take their little areas and stay out of each other's business. Well, he decides, I'm going to go into Russia now because I want Russia. So Hitler attacks Russia. He does exactly what Napoleon did, which is set up a 2-front war. He's got battles on each side of his country. Now, he may not be expecting resistance, but it's going to come from the West. And, of course, the Soviets are going to get beat back. He's going to make it as far as Moscow. But he's not going to make it any further than that because just like Napoleon, he thinks he can do it in a few weeks, but it doesn't happen that way, of course. And he gets stuck in Russia during the winter, and that just completely shuts down the German forces there. So they get about as far as Moscow, and then they just slow down. And you got to take into consideration here, he just attacked his ally. Okay, I don't even know what kind of intelligence you got to be lacking to do that. But it does show that, the honor among thieves, because Russia and Germany were acting like thieves at this time, just taking whatever they wanted, no matter who it belonged to. And what is the honor among thieves? Well, there is none. Okay, they don't have any honor. They will turn on you on a dime. Okay, it won't take anything for them to realize that if you have something they want, they'll just take it from you too, even though you're considered their ally or their friend. Okay, so this is what's going on here. We're not dealing with a whole lot of loyalty here between these two countries to begin with. Okay, and remember that also at this time, he has made a non aggression pact with Japan, which he didn't have any interest in the other side of the world at this time anyway. But he has entered into that pact so that Japan will act as a force for him. He's looking for some allies, some support in case he gets attacked. But Hitler's worst nightmare is to have America get in this fight because America's going to bring something to it that no other country on the planet can bring to this fight. And remember, it's all that production. Hitler cannot do what America does. He could not create and produce that much through his forced economy. Okay? He can't even steal that much in supplies. So what's going to happen is Japan is going to attack Pearl Harbor. They're also going to attack like 7 other islands. So there are other places that they are attacking and trying to conquer in the Pacific. And they do all that on this in the same like 24 hours. So when you hear about the attack on Pearl Harbor, there's actually 8 places where they attacked. But Pearl Harbor obviously was the big target because of the naval fleet was there. So what's the first thing we're going to do as Americans? Well, you attacked our country. It's time to declare war. Now, by doing so, Germany is now forced to declare war on the United States because that's the pact that they had with Japan. Okay? And he's got to honor that because he's going to need Japan. He needs Japan to draw off the fire. But remember, that is Hitler's worst nightmare, is that the Americans are going to come, okay, and bring all of their goodies and their steaks, and they're going to be well fed and well equipped and well dressed for this fight, okay? And they're going to bring it to all their friends that are being beat up right now in Europe. So this was probably a pretty bad day for Hitler. On December 7th, 1941, Japan flies in their planes and bombs Pearl Harbor. Okay, and as well as those 7 other islands. And by just a act of providence, the aircraft carriers, which are going to be the most important part of this war effort in the Pacific, just happened to be all out of the harbor at that day on some kind of exercise. And so they are not going to be destroyed at this time. Now, why is Japan attacking Pearl Harbor? Well, they're on an imperialistic march right now, and that this is another island that they could definitely benefit from being able to control and having access to those resources. And they know that their time is limited. They're very land poor. They don't have a lot of geography to their country. So their imperialistic efforts are trying to get them out there so that they can have more access to more resources. But I think that they really, like Hitler, just get very arrogant about their power and their ability. And big mistake here to awake the sleeping giant. Okay, not a good idea to do that to America. That is not going to work out well for them. Now, I put this quote on here that is purportedly supposed to have been said by the commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy, Yamamoto, that you cannot invade the American mainland because there'd be a rifle behind every blade of grass. And that's in reference to our Second Amendment. And you know what? I'm just going to keep saying that he said it, and I don't know what the proof is there, but he's right. If he did say it, or whoever made it up, they're right. Because the Second Amendment was our protection. That's why the Second Amendment is so important to this country, because the people themselves, even though they know they have this incredible army that supports them and defends America, still, when it comes down to it, the Americans want to be able to defend themselves. They're self-governing peoples. Okay, they don't wait for someone to come bring the gun or the firepower. Okay, they want to be able to have that in their own control. So I don't think this is too far off the mark here, and I don't think Japan would have ever been foolish enough to attack the mainland. But this is going to be enough to flip the switch. So President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is still president at this time, is going to approach Congress, and he's going to ask Congress to declare war on Japan. And Congress is going to grant him that request. I do want you to take a minute to watch the video and listen to the words of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I think it's important to know what the attitude was at this time. And those are really important words, and they're very famous words. Take a minute to do that. There's a video that goes along with it, and it basically is just showing the House chamber. And much like you watched Trump maybe give his State of the Union address, this is also the same manner in which FDR is going to come to Congress. So just like you saw Trump and standing and giving his speech, and then there's two people behind him, when he's a president is doing that, he's standing at the podium giving the speech, and the president of the Senate is sitting behind him, as well as the Speaker of the House. Okay, so those are the leaders of the two chambers of Congress that are sitting behind the president. This arrangement doesn't change over 100 years. Okay, we still got the same setup. This is how a president approaches Congress. All right, take a minute to listen to FDR and watch the video, and then take a break. Okay, because when we come back, Americans are going to be going to war. All right, we left off where America was attacked at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii by Japan. And so now that sleeping giant's awake, and it's time to take names and kick dragon. And that's exactly what America's about to do. It takes a while to get these engines fired up because remember, we're in the midst of a depression at this time. And it's not going to be easy to convert all that back to that war production mode, but it will happen. When you look at the global map of what's going on here, it does have that feel that now America's got a two-front war going on. Now, that's kind of true in the sense that we have two enemies that are on different sides of the world, but there is no security threat to the continental United States. So just be clear of that. There's no enemy trying to attack from either the Atlantic or the Pacific seaboard of America. Okay, so that's not happening. We're going to take our war machine to them. And so that's what's going to happen. And so basically what you have set up is you've got the European theater, and there are the Axis powers that are active there against the Allied powers that are active there. And all of the Allied powers are active there, okay? And then in the Pacific theater, you've got really just, and the only thing we're going to talk about today is the United States against Japan. So the Axis powers are now Germany, Italy, and Japan. And the Allied powers are Britain, Russia, or the Soviets, and the United States. And I have switched there because remember, they were on the sides of the Germans until Germany decided to stab them in the back and attack them. Okay, so now they come over to our side to try to get assistance from the Allies to draw Hitler's attention away from Russia. And of course, so now the Allied powers are Britain. The primary active Allied powers are Britain, Russia, and the United States. So again, I want you to print out the map and label these things on your map. Don't put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. Put the names of those powers. I want you to be able to associate geographically what powers, what nations are fighting who on what side. That's very important that you understand that. Okay, because history is all about who's doing what, when, where, and how. Okay. And if you don't understand that about this war, you're just not going to get it. Most of these players are going to be in the European theater. So if you look at up there, number one is Germany, which they have now taken over just about the entire European continent. Okay. And then two is Italy. They're just that peninsula that's below Europe. And Japan, which is on the other side of the globe. Okay. Really, they're just there to draw the Americans into yet another conflict. On the Allied powers, Britain is sitting number 4, just above Europe. Russia is number 5. And the United States, of course, is number 6. And of course, you see the United States in both of these maps because I have flipped the globe around and now we're on the Pacific theater side. Okay. So obviously, you have the United States and then this vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Okay, I'm sorry about all that noise. Those are my dogs. They decide to bark at the wind sometimes or their friends across the river. So sorry about that. But okay, so if you look at this map of the Pacific Theater, look at this vast amount of space. So you go from, in the European theater, this very concentrated area where a lot of people are living and a lot of people are living close to each other, to a completely different war theater. You've got a completely spread out situation here with a bunch of tiny little minuscule islands relative to the size of the Pacific Ocean. It's just an extraordinary dichotomy to be looking at both of these theaters. So the new players of the game are going to be in the European theater in Europe. You're going to have Dwight D. Eisenhower is going to be the commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces. Okay, and George S. Patton is going to be the Army General for the 7th and 3rd Army in the Mediterranean and then in France and Germany. And then in Pacific Theater, you've got 2 different generals, obviously, because they're on the other side of the world doing a completely different job. Douglas MacArthur is going to be the commander of the Southwest Pacific Theater. And look at the map. You know, north, south, east, west. We're talking about down here closer to Australia, okay? He's dealing with the southern portion, primarily the Philippines. Chester Nimitz is the commander of the Allied Pacific Fleet and Forces. There are so many other generals involved in this war. I can't begin to even bring all of those on board. But just know that it's not just these 4 generals. There are several other military leaders involved in this effort. All right, when America gets hit at Pearl Harbor and we're kind of basically forced into war with Japan, FDR and Winston Churchill are going to get together and decide that their first priority is to get Hitler. They must destroy Hitler. So therefore, it gets the Hitler First strategy name. Okay, that's what they're going for. They need to liberate France, and they need to liberate the rest of Europe, and they need to remove Hitler from power. Now, there's going to be activity in the Pacific going on at this time, but I am not going to go back and forth between the 2 theaters because, one, that's just too confusing. And so it'd be too hard to tell the story of what's happening in each one if I keep switching them back and forth on you. So we're just going to talk about the European theater, and on top of that, that was the primary goal, was to get Hitler out of Europe. Now, what Hitler feared most was that the Americans would get into the war because he knew what that meant in terms of the relief that American involvement would mean to the Allies. They're finally going to get supplies that they need, and they're going to get good supplies that they need, okay, and lots of it. So, and that's really, now that he has 2 fronts, Hitler's not going to be able to keep up with that. And he's going to lose ground because of that. The first thing that the Allies are going to do is get Africa liberated. They're going to basically try to get the Germans and the Italians out of Africa. And it's a good place for the American soldiers that are just coming on board, America's just coming on board, to kind of get their feet wet, okay, in this war and kind of get acclimated, test fire their military readiness, so to speak. And the other point of going down into Africa is to draw forces away from Europe. So if Hitler has to kind of supply Africa because now they're getting bombarded with Allied attacks, he's going to have to send troops that are fighting in Europe away from Europe and into Africa. This is designed to help Russia, to help the Soviets, because they're being so bombarded with Germany practically in Moscow at this point. And this plan is going to work. Russia is going to be able to push back, as you can see from the arrows. So the red flag with the yellow in there, that's the hammer and the sickle. That's Russia. That's the Russian Soviet flag. They're going to be able, over this time and up until 1945, keep pushing that front line that Germany had pushed all the way up to their front door. And they're going to push it all the way back through Poland and into Germany again. So they're able to do that because now the Allied forces are down in Africa. And it's called Operation Torch. The biggest worry here is that the Vichy French are in control down here. Remember that the French had colonial interests down in North Africa. Okay, so that's why their interest is there. And of course, the Nazis and the Italians are there to take it. Okay, so that's where all this conflict is coming from. But what's going to happen is that Britain is going to come in from the north. America is going to come in from the west. And there is going to be just an exchange of land for several months, over a year, until they can finally force General Rommel, which is the Nazi general that's known as Desert Fox. They're basically going to force him to have to evacuate Africa. So this is very successful. And all of these areas are freed from Axis control in 1943. Their next target is to get up and take control of Italy. I do appreciate how systematic they are about this. They don't try to take on too much too soon. And, taking on Germany too soon would have been foolish at this point. So they're able to go up through Sicily. America goes up through Sicily. Britain is going to come in right midway on that peninsula, and they're just going to fight their way through. And in 1944, they're going to free Italy from fascist control. Mussolini's going to basically be run out of power. The Italians are sick of this war, and Italy's going to end up declaring war on Germany. Okay, and really this is just an empty declaration. It's basically designed to make the announcement that the Allies have indeed freed up Rome and freed up Italy from the fascist control of Mussolini. So that's just basically the point of Italy declaring war on Germany. Because obviously they were on the same sides before the Allies got there. Okay, now's the big kahuna, okay? They've got to go in and they've got to, initially liberate France. They've got to do that. They need the help of the French. Hitler knows this is coming. He's trying to prepare as best he can for this invasion that's coming. He just doesn't know where it's coming from. So what they do is they set up, and this is all, of course, in secret, very strict measures are taken to make sure that this remains top secret about where they're actually going to invade France. Because see, France isn't France anymore. It's Nazi-controlled area. So they're basically invading Germany by invading France. The goal is going to be to get the Allies to come in from France and push on to Germany and push them back into actually where they originally were in Germany. And so you can see that by that arc right there. And at the same time, Russia or the Soviets are pushing into Germany from the east. So they've got a Western front and an Eastern front. This is that deadly mistake that Hitler makes. He should never have invaded Russia, okay? But nevertheless, he got arrogant, and here he's about to feel the repercussions of a two-front war. The D-Day invasion is considered the boldest and most successful large-scale invasion in military history. It is just extraordinary how much troops and supplies and ships and equipment that they move in this invasion. It's just it's really hard to even capture what happens here. But just on a numbers basis, 160,000 troops. They are just going to pour troops onto these beaches. I mean, just 160,000 coming in either by sea or by plane, and parachuters coming in, paratroopers coming in. 7,000 ships, 5,000 landing craft. Now remember, the ships can't get all the way in. Even the smaller ships cannot get all the way in to these beaches. I mean, they're going to run aground. So you have to have a shallow draft craft to come in and actually land equipment and troops and men. And they have 5,000 of these, okay? Because there's a lot of them to move. 289 escort vehicles to ensure their progress, and 277 minesweepers to evade all of those traps that are set for the Allies as they're moving through the waters. Now, this is pure offense. They are coming in to a very fortified German position. The Germans are on the coast. They have dug in. They have armed themselves to the teeth, and they're ready to defend the coastline. Now, the D-Day invasion was scheduled for June 6th, 1944, and by an act of providence, a storm that would have delayed this invasion and really mucked things up. It's really hard to get this much mobilized and then to have to wait somewhere. That's very difficult when you have all these troops and supplies just sitting here waiting to achieve their goal. But they're not held back, and they get clear access to the beaches of Normandy. So if you look up there, you see Great Britain, obviously where the British flag is. The American flag obviously is approaching at the same time. And this is all going to happen at the same time. It's just a massive invasion. Eventually, they're going to get 2 million troops fighting at this front on the Western Front of Germany. And it's going to be tremendous how they're able to liberate France and take back this land for the French. Now, the interesting thing here is that the French are not just sitting there. They're not all the Vichy French that have just basically the puppet government for the Nazis. Okay, underneath all of that was the French resistance. This resistance plays an absolutely crucial role in this invasion because they're ready to come in and take up arms once the Allies get here. So on the right, it's a very interesting story about it, and I can't really go into it, but basically it's led by Charles de Gaulle. There's about 300,000 men and women, a lot of women that are participating in this underground resistance, and they're providing intelligence to the Allies, which is critical for this invasion. Okay, that intelligence let them know where the Nazis were, where they were moving, and they would go in and sabotage Nazi efforts. They would go in and blow up the rail line so that the Nazis couldn't move their troops out to the beaches. They provided that softening of the Nazi army so that the Allies, when they're coming in, could make a good advancement into France. Okay, take a minute and watch the D-Day film. This invasion is given the name Operation Overlord, and it's primarily there to liberate France. What's going to happen is they're going to end up liberating all of Western Europe. There's no audio except for music. It's all video because remember at this time most of the stuff is silent video anyway. But it gives you a good idea of the hours and the minutes before this invasion takes place, where you have all of these men coming in on these landing crafts and they're just waiting. They're just waiting for that moment when the door's going to fall and they're going to have to storm that beach and take on heavy fire and just keep on advancing no matter what happens. It's very impressive. And I can't tell that story. The pictures will tell you the story. Of all the videos you're going to watch for this lecture, watch this one because it's very important to see what effort was made here on the D-Day invasion. Okay, I hope you got something out of that. If you didn't and you wanted to find more, there is just more than you could possibly ask for out there about D-Day, about this entire war. There's just going to be one video after another about this war. So there's plenty of footage, there's plenty of pictures, there's plenty of stories that you can pick up and find anywhere on the internet about World War II. But I hope that one's a good one. Just give you a feel for that somber moment before they land on the beach, and then just the viciousness of having to move all that equipment out of those landing crafts, get it to the shore, sustain the heavy fire, and just keep resisting until they were able to subdue the Germans on the beach. Okay, there's not much more to talk about here. There is a moment in this advance across Europe to take back France and the rest of Europe where there's a little area where some Americans get trapped. It's called the Battle of the Bulge. It's another good battle to talk about. I'm not going to go into that in this one, but that's another major battle that's coming along. But eventually Hitler's just going to run out of options. Okay, what happens is they unfortunately, and I couldn't even give this much time in this lecture because I just don't have the time to do it. It doesn't make it any less important. But of course, Hitler hated the Jews, and he had set up concentration camps, which were basically slave labor camps, to force the Jews and get some kind of product out of them as they were holding them prisoners. And so the Jews have all been forced, and not just Jews. There were prisoners of war here. There were political opponents here. There were more than just the Jews here, but primarily Jewish people. And at this time, they're using them for their slave labor. But what happens is that once Hitler knows that he's not going to make it in this war, that Germany is going to be destroyed, he comes up with the final solution, which is he's just going to kill them now. The point is just to execute all of them. And we can go into that in a long story, a very in-depth story, but I'm not going to be able to do that justice, so I'm not even going to go there. Yeah, I'm sure you have heard about the Holocaust, which for Jews, they refer to it as Shoah, which is a catastrophe. And of course, there's going to be 6 million deaths in these concentration camps. And the final solution is just a brutal murder, just senseless murder of millions of people in a very quick amount of time. And at the end of this war, Britain is going to ensure that Israel is going to get their own country. And just a few short years after Hitler is destroyed and Germany is destroyed, Israel is going to be founded. And that's going to happen in 1948. And a lot of these surviving Jews are going to be able to move into their own homeland. And that's a story all in and of itself. It makes me smile to think about it because after all of this time being in dysphoria and not being able to be home, you know, be where they are meant to be in Israel as their own nation. It was a beautiful moment, and it is a result of this war. Okay, so at this time, approaching May of 1945, Hitler and the German forces are basically being crushed. From the Americans and the British on the Western Front and the Russians on the Eastern Front. And because Russia had a, quote, special interest in Eastern Europe, they're going to be allowed to actually go in and take Berlin. But what happens is the Americans get a lot of opportunity to go in and see all these concentration camps and tell the rest of the world what happened here in this war and what happened to the Jewish people in these concentration camps. So I think that was just an interesting twist on the end of this European theater. Most of the Allies were not going to participate in the taking of Berlin, but they did get other experiences that I think were just as important as that one final victorious moment. Hitler is going to know he is toast, and his dreams of a Third Reich are now over, and Hitler commits suicide on May 2nd. And on May 7th, the Germans surrender to the Allies, and Europe is now free. Okay, this next slide is just to kind of give you a feel, kind of a little backfill with some pictures here about what was happening on that map. And a couple of vocabulary words here. So Blitzkrieg was the Germans' lightning war, and it was a very intense military warfare that was intended to bring those swift victories that they got in Europe. It was combined and concurrent air, land, and sea attacks, with air superiority being the most important. They would come in and soften up their enemies with just repeated bombing, and then come in with the infantry or navy and finish off the job. So Blitzkrieg is definitely a word you need to be taken away from the World War II engagements. This picture on the left at the top with the planes, that is Nazi Germany bombing London. Okay, they just suffered horribly until the United States entered the war. And right there, the Eiffel Tower, that is Hitler, right underneath that Eiffel Tower. They had finally gotten into France, occupied France, and marched right through Paris, through the Champs-Élysées, and put a Nazi flag at the top of that Eiffel Tower. All right, now the French resistance was very colorful, okay? Again, led by Charles de Gaulle, he's on the right there, but had these very interesting characters, just freedom fighters. And Maquis is their name, and that was when they had to escape. They went into high ground that was like scrubland so that they could hide there until they were ready to come out and fight. But they were just basically guerrilla bands of French resistance, and they weren't very organized at first. But they did fight the Nazis during this occupation, and they had to be very careful against the Vichy French, because even though these were their countrymen, these were loyal, the Vichy French were loyal to Germany. So you kind of didn't know who your friend was. You didn't know who your foe was. Okay, a very dangerous position to be in here. Hats off to a lot of these patriots in France. Just absolutely extraordinary. Okay, so their name is the Maquis. All right, below there, that is an American soldier engaging with kind of the first time the soldiers are going to be discovering these concentration camps. Now, these prisoners actually look pretty good, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but a lot of times you'll see from these pictures that they're just skin and bones. They have been starved, overworked, and just enslaved for so long. They look like skeletons with skin on them. You know, it doesn't take a lot of looking to find those pictures. These are those camps that were liberated, all of them: Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Mauthausen, Nordhausen, Ravensbrück. Before they would shuttle the Jews and others into these concentration camps, they forced them to live in Jewish ghettos, which are basically just very concentrated areas where they could control them. And of course, they weren't hardly given any access to food, so they were starving there as well. But there were uprisings in these ghettos, and the Warsaw Uprising is one of the largest. And it was the largest ghetto, but it was the largest uprising as well. And a lot of them paid with their lives with these uprisings. But obviously, you can see here that they are being ushered out and basically taken by force at this point, either executed or taken to concentration camps. Okay, let's go through the Pacific Theater of War. It's going to get started a little later, but it's not going to be too much later than the entry into the European theater. So there are other things going on here in the Pacific and on mainland China, and I'm just gonna briefly tell you what those are. We're not gonna go through those battles, okay? The British are primarily interested in their colonial settlements there, and that is primarily in Burma and Hong Kong. So the British are fighting in this Pacific theater, but they are not doing a lot of interaction with Japan, with the Americans. Most of this is just all of the Americans, okay? Especially in the actual Pacific naval engagements. All of these little islands in here, okay? Britain was primarily on the mainland. Now, Russia has a totally different interest here. Their job was to come in and help the Allies in the Pacific theater with Japan. They don't have any interest in doing that, okay? They got what they wanted in Europe. They got their land back, and they're going to get some of Eastern Europe when this is all over. But basically, they're just ready to now collect the paycheck, and they are not going to help America at all in this Pacific theater. What they are going to do is take further advantage of a situation. They're going to go in and they are going to fight the Japanese, and so that they can get part of Asia back. What's very unfortunate is that China has a republic functioning right now as a government. But unfortunately, the Soviet communists are going to have an interest in helping the communists that are challenging the Republic of China right now. And all of the supplies that the Soviets have gotten in Asia as a result of taking back land from the Japanese, they're going to hand over to the enemy of China military supplies. I find this so reprehensible. Not just this, but a lot of the backstabbing that the communists, the Bolsheviks, the Soviets are going to do at this time period after we helped liberate them. It does explain a lot of what's going to happen in history after this point. The communists are going to come to power in China, and it's going to have to do with the fact that the communist Russia helped them into that position. Now, the Republic of China is going to declare war on Japan, and they are going to be engaging in those conflicts as well, but that's going to be on the mainland and not part of this Pacific theater that I'm talking about. I'm just going to go through these battles, and they're identified on there. And what I've done is I've just used icons so you kind of see that primarily what's happening in most of these engagements is either going to be an aerial attack, or it's going to be a naval engagement with the ships, or they're going to get there with the ships and they're going to have a land battle of infantry on the islands. Of course, this all begins with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which also includes at this time not just Pearl Harbor, but the Philippines, Wake Island, Guam, Malaysia, Thailand, Shanghai, and Midway. All of those places are going to get hit by the Japanese at one time as well during this attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay, and remember, just like Europe, there's a lot more battles that are happening, and I am just picking out a few from here to go through. Okay, obviously, I'm not going to be talking about all the different battles, but probably the most next significant one is that in the Philippines, the U.S. are going to suffer a major defeat. And MacArthur is there, but they have been so overrun that MacArthur is forced to leave, and he promises to return because the Filipinos really needed American help here, and they were a good fighting force, but they could not sustain the Japanese at this time. So MacArthur leaves at this time in 1942, and what happens here is this horrendous death march that they call it, and they force the American troops to basically walk 60 miles and move equipment for 60 miles and never feed them or give them water. And about 5,000 of these troops are going to die. So this is really hard on the Americans to have sustained this. And MacArthur just feels horrendously bad about this situation and probably didn't feel very proud about having to escape from that fate. So there's 76,000 Allied POWs that are taken, and about 12,000 of those are going to be Americans. But again, 5,000 of those 12,000 are going to die. Now, down there in the southern portion where Australia is, just above there is the Battle of the Coral Sea. This is the US's first ability to have victory over the Japanese in a major battle. And it's a historic battle because it's just an aerial battle. And the ships, the aircraft carriers, are never even within sight of each other. So this is kind of a first for military history that this whole battle resolved around the aerial engagement. Okay, right there in the middle of the Pacific Rim there, you can see the battleship with the little explosion on it, and it says Battle of Midway. That is the turning point. That battle is the turning point of the Pacific War. And it is actually midway across the Pacific, okay, from the United States to Asia. So this battle is a major victory by Admiral Nimitz and his naval fleet. And an interesting little story here is that if you see right above it, you see the infantry right there in the middle, and it looks like they're in the middle of nowhere, but Alaska is right there. And the Aleutian Islands spread out. That little chain spreads all the way out. And the Japanese have invaded a couple of those islands during this Midway battle. And what happens is, I think what the intention was just to draw off the Americans, because now, they've got an attack on the mainland. Well, not really, but they do just come in and retake those Aleutian Islands from the Japanese. But nevertheless, it is an actual invasion of Alaska. Okay, move south to all the way down to Australia again, and you see the ship symbol in Guadalcanal. Now, this is an interesting story, not just because America is going to lose a carrier in this engagement, but this carrier has 5 brothers that are serving at the same time on this carrier. And all 5 of these brothers are going to die at this time. So it's an interesting time in the war and a good story, but I'm not going to go into that story. Now, what's interesting about the Pacific Theater is that the military strategy is so different because it's a completely different environment. It's out in the middle of the ocean. Okay, so transportation is all obviously by Navy ship, but you have to have this network of islands at which you can go to so that the planes can refuel, so that the ships can resupply. The goal here is to get close enough to Japan so that they can run aerial attacks over the Japan mainland. That is the goal here, because they're trying to take Japan. They are trying to defeat Japan. They make good progress with all of these victories, but what they really need to do is get in there and take Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Okay, they need those 2 because those are within striking range of the mainland. Iwo Jima, that battle is one of those battles that really reflects that fighting style of the Japanese. what they did is for months, they bombarded this island to try to soften up the Japanese. The Japanese were absolutely entrenched underground in these islands. There's no cover there. Okay, it's just volcanic ash. And there's like not even, you can't even see any vegetation. Okay, so it's completely inhospitable, just a horrendous place. But nevertheless, it was a landing place, okay? And it had landing strip on it for airplanes. That's obviously its military strategic wealth right there. The Americans needed to take it. And so they bomb it for months. And I want you to watch the 36 Days from Hell, because the 36 days don't even start until after the bombing has already happened for, an eternity is what it feels like. And you would think that nothing could survive and sustain that much bombardment. But the Japanese are still in there, and you can't see them. Most of the time, they never saw their enemy because they were so entrenched and so deep down in the caves that they had made. And the Japanese, they do not surrender. So you're either going to destroy them or they're going to defeat you. So there's no surrender, there's no taking prisoners with the Japanese. They're just a very honorable people. Okay, that's just in their culture and in their tradition. And it would have been very dishonorable to have been taken prisoner. So there's going to be just a staggering loss of life on both sides on these two islands. But nevertheless, America is going to prevail, and it is going to be the key to getting into Japan and deciding what they're going to do in terms of invading Japan. Also, the famous picture from Iwo Jima, the raising of the American flag over Mount Suribachi. I want you to take time. We're almost done here. I'm going to wrap it up after this video. I do want you to watch the Iwo Jima video because it gives you now a taste of a very different war. This was the Pacific War, and it has a very different feel to it than the European War did. So take a minute and watch the Iwo Jima 36 Days of Hell video. Okay, I hope that gave you a good feel for how different this theater was than the European. But after these battles, the United States decides that the Japanese are a fierce force to be contended with and very resilient enemy. And they just feel like it's going to cost too many lives to go in and do a land invasion in Japan. And so they decide to take advantage of a new technology that they have. And they're actually going to get this technology from a German Jew. Now, pretty much everyone knows who Albert Einstein is. He is the German Jewish physicist that escaped from Germany very early on when Germany was taking over Europe and came to the United States. And what happens is that he tips off FDR about Germany's research into the atomic bomb, that he knew that Germany was very close to getting this technology, and hence another reason why to stop Hitler. Okay, that's all we needed was Hitler with atomic bombs. So FDR starts immediate research into creating one of these bombs, and they are successful in getting it ready, and it does happen right around the time that we have finally decided that the land invasion is going to be too costly. And so they decide to use this weaponry on Japan. What they do is they ask Japan. Now, this is really kind of, useless thing to do, knowing the Japanese. But they tell Japan that they must unconditionally surrender or face absolute destruction. Okay, they're not going to tell them what they're about to do, but they are warning them. Of course, the Japanese are not going to have any of that. Okay, so what happens is that there is one of these bombs loaded onto the Enola Gay, And Paul Tibbets is the Air Force pilot for this mission, and his job is to drop this new technology, this new weaponry over Hiroshima, Japan. The bomb hits its target, it detonates, and almost instantly, 80,000 Japanese are going to lose their life. It's absolutely devastating. And even with this devastation, I mean, I don't even go too much into what happens here. But even with this devastation, Japan did not surrender. After 3 days, America decides to drop a second bomb, and they drop it on Nagasaki, Japan. And 40,000 Japanese are going to lose their life instantly when that bomb drops. It's not just the loss of life. There are an equal number of radiation burns of an equal amount of people. So the devastation here is just astronomical. And it's decisive. And Emperor Hirohito seeks immediate peace with the United States. All right, there's one more video I want you to catch. And I really do like this video. I think it's because of the words that are said by General MacArthur at this time. I think in the face of such a noble country and nation like Japan, the words that are said here are very appropriate. Now, MacArthur does not shy away from making a massive demonstration of strength at this time. I mean, they continue to show their strength even in this surrender ceremony. It's very formal, and it's a huge show of strength, and they actually have a massive flyover of American bombers that are just there to show strength. But it's a rare film to be able to watch the process of this surrender. So take a minute to watch the surrender of Japan on the USS Missouri. Okay, just a couple of pictures here and a couple of terms I just want you to know. Kamikaze, okay, Japanese suicide pilot in World War I. What they would do is take planes that really weren't in good condition anymore because they had no intention of keeping them. And they would find pilots that were willing to be suicide pilots that would crash their airplane into these Navy ships. Obviously to cause mass destruction. And it does work a lot of times, but sometimes it didn't work. So that's what these first two pictures are on the left. You can see the planes coming in and then obviously inflicting a lot of damage here in this second picture. The Sullivan brothers, that's all 5 of them right there in a picture that were killed on that cruiser in Guadalcanal. And then back at the left, remember we talked about I think it was the very first lecture, the Navajo code talkers, because we were talking about Native Americans and how instrumental they would be in this war. And they were, in fact, used in the war because their language was never written and it was never taken outside of that small area of the United States. And so it was a good code to use that the Japanese would never know because they would not be aware of this language. And then obviously the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. The next one is a photograph from the surrender on the USS Missouri. The map is of the Death March in the Philippines. And then when MacArthur left, he promised to return to the Philippines. And he does return around the time of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And he does take back the Philippines for the Americans. And they make a very grandiose entrance. And this picture is a very famous picture. And you see it every time you open one of these videos because it's one of the pictures in the opening. And it's MacArthur walking up the beach to return to the Philippines. And he declares, I have returned. I promised to return, and I'm here now, and I'm not leaving without America having taken back the Philippines. And of course, they do take back the Philippines and control that today. All right, I have a couple more things here, and we're going to wrap this up. We talked about this a little bit, but the new age of weaponry here is going to be this atomic age and these atomic bombs. Just these little tidbits of history. That first bomb was called Little Boy, and it was flown on the Enola Gay by Paul Tibbets, and he's the one that drops it on Hiroshima, killing 80,000 Japanese civilians. The second one is called Fat Man, dropped on Nagasaki, and it kills 40,000 people. Japan surrenders 5 days later, which is really, that in and of itself is quite extraordinary. I mean, these people just impress the heck out of me. All right, and then obviously we talked about Albert Einstein being the one that tips off FDR so that this research will happen, and that's called the Manhattan Project. That's the secret code name for it. And of course, all the war crimes, especially the Nazi war criminals, are going to be put on trial and prosecuted, and some of them executed or imprisoned as a result of their crimes during the war. Most of this is surrounding, obviously, the concentration camps in Germany, and those are going to happen in Nuremberg, Germany. The swift rise of communism is going to happen about this time because we're going to be moving into the Cold War, and that is a result of this rise of communism. And because of the end of the war, Russia is now empowered. They're unleashed from all this obligation. Now, I really feel like the Russian government, not the Russians, okay? There's a difference between the governing body and the people. The Russian people are a really impressive and beautiful culture, okay? Just, they're not the same representation as the communist nation, the communist government that overtook them. Okay, so always make that distinction, that whenever I refer to Russian communist, I am not talking about the Russian people. I'm talking about their government that so destroyed their nation. All right, so Joseph Stalin is the dictator, and he is a dictator in Russia at this time, and it's Soviet Russia because it has a new name that they've given it. But he's such an opportunist during this war. Remember, during World War I, Lenin was lifted to power by Germany, by their enemy. Okay, just opportunist for whatever it'll take to get power. And in World War II, they agree with Germany to split Poland. But the minute Germany turns on them, they seek alliance with the Allies. Okay, so Winston Churchill was always hesitant to work with the Russians, with the Soviets, but FDR felt like their cooperation was essential. And so at the Yalta Conference, Churchill warns about Russia's loyalties. And what he basically is saying is that an iron curtain is going to fall across Europe if you allow the Soviets to have control of half of Europe, because Europe is going to get split up. Okay, there's going to be a treaty. Nations are going to go on one side or the other in terms of control because they're sure as heck not going to let Germany have this power again. So they're going to get split up between the Allies, and we're going to talk about that later. But basically, Stalin promised, as a result of getting help, during the European theater, that he would assist the Allies in the Pacific theater. He didn't do anything, okay? He helped himself in the Pacific theater to help the Chinese to power, okay? So he could have an ally in the future. Okay? That's what Stalin did as far as help. He only helps himself, okay? That's what communists do. They help themselves to everything you have except the work that you have to actually do to get it. And this is a clear example of that. Stalin also promised that there would be post-war elections in all of these Eastern European nations. He never gave them that. Okay, that was part of the agreement, and he turned tail again and refused to do that because he's a dictator and because he wanted power. Just as Churchill had predicted, Russia built, in some places, literally an iron curtain to separate the East from the West. All of Europe that was behind the Iron Curtain would be trapped in communism, and everyone on the Western side of that curtain would be in freedom. It's an unfortunate future for these nations that were already ravaged by war, to have to go through yet more oppression by the Soviets. It's unfortunate, but this is the outcome of that war. And so you got to know who your alliances are, okay? Churchill knew what we were doing at that time. He knew what the Allies were getting involved in, and he predicted it right on target. And if you look over there on the map on the bottom right and you see all that red, that's what Soviet communist Russia is going to have control over. All of those people in those nations, in that territory. All right, last slide here. World War II ends and America's going to go home. Thank God. During the war in 1945, FDR suffers a fatal and very sudden stroke on April 12th. So right there at the heat of the European, the culmination of the European war, we're going to lose FDR, but Truman is going to succeed him, and he's also going to serve a second term. And he is going to be the one that makes the decision to drop the bomb on Japan at the end of World War II. And that picture there of the American flag is just the Americans when they finally liberated Paris. They marched through the Champs-Élysées just as the Nazis had done, but in a very celebratory fashion, because obviously the French were just elated to have been liberated by the Allied forces. And then I just love the picture of this massive amounts of soldiers on the ship returning home, all probably seeing land in sight and cannot wait to get off that ship and go home to family. But a lot of soldiers are not going to come home. There's 415,000 that are going to die in the war, and another 600,000 that are going to be injured or maimed as a result of the war. The monetary cost, $340 billion cost to Americans. And it's the most spent by any nation in this conflict. It's really important that you never forget the price of war that's paid in American lives and in its fortunes. You need to remember that, because without them, you wouldn't have the freedom and the prosperity you have now. Imagine for one moment if Hitler had gotten a hold of that atomic bomb. With his flippant attitude about conquering Europe, would he not just simply conquer the rest of the world? Absolutely, absolutely terrifying, the thought of that. But that is not how it went down. Never forget the price of war and the price that American lives paid for you. Y'all have a fabulous afternoon, and I will see you next time at GW Bridge Academy in American History class.